What's up, Flick Connection? This is Darren. Game of Thrones Season 7 is officially over, so today I want to give you a list of 10 movies that will help tide you over to Season 8. I've spent some time putting this list together, and some of you may be surprised to see that Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies are nowhere to be found on this list. Game of Thrones is so unique, I wanted to really catch movies that at least had some major element similar to a major element in Game of Thrones. Now, before I get into the list, at the end of the video, I'm going to give you instructions on how you can win a deck of cards that is a movie-themed deck of cards. It's really cool. It's really well done. I'm going to put some links in the description below, but they're really cool. Each one's got a different movie theme on it. Every single one, not just any different suit. And they're all really well done. They're really well designed. So it's a really cool gift for yourself or for somebody. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's get to the list. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the bottom half of the list. So let me give you the bottom 5 of my top 10 first. Okay, now that those are out of the way, here's my top 5. And these aren't necessarily the top 5 movies that feature sort of medieval times or anything like that. They're really just movies that give you some element of Game of Thrones that you're going to be missing over the next year while we wait for this final season. So to kick off my top 5, I want to go with Reign of Fire. Now, this movie did not do well for several reasons. One is that it's not particularly good, which sounds crazy, but as far as a movie about dragons, it's pretty badass, and it really gets overlooked really because it's got some just major storytelling flaws, and it just is kind of clumsy. It kind of gets forgotten. It's not necessarily bad, it's just mediocre, and unfortunately, it gets forgotten for that reason. Because it's not great, and it doesn't have the cheese factor to have turned it into like a cult classic. But it's still pretty sick. I mean, there's huge dragons. Essentially what it is it takes place in the future where dragons have taken over the planet. The whole planet is just like scorched earth. But Christian Bale is the lead in it. Matthew McConaughey plays this just greased up, buff, bald guy. He's really badass in it. You almost don't even recognize that it's him at first. Gerard Butler, pre-300, is actually in it. So you don't get to see his abs or anything, ladies, but he's in it as well. And some of the dragon action sequences are pretty cool. Now, it is PG-13, so you're going to get sort of Jurassic Park level violence when it comes to these dragons, but it's still pretty solid in its effects for the day and everything like that. So if you're really just kind of needing a taste for dragons, this movie is going to give you more than the majority of the Game of Thrones seasons, let alone, you know, the Game of Thrones series as a whole. Now at number 4, it's the most recent movie on the list, and that's Guy Ritchie's King Arthur. This one just dropped on Blu-ray at the time that I'm filming this. I've seen it. It did not do well critically. It got somewhere in the 20s on Rotten Tomatoes, but the user rating on it is up in the 70s, and there's a good reason for that. This movie's pretty sick. It's almost like a metal music video without the metal music. I say a metal music video because there's just giant creatures and glowing swords, and it's just like it's like almost like a Black Sabbath song or an old Zeppelin song or something. Like it's just really cool. Guy Ritchie did some really awesome things with it directorially, the way he kind of tells the story. but also the way people tell stories within the story is done in kind of a cool way. But I wouldn't have necessarily noticed it was Guy Ritchie had I not known that to begin with. I would have been surprised to see that in the credits, I think. So it's a cool flick. It's going to give you that Game of Thrones flavor that you're going to be missing over the next 12 months. So I recommend it for that reason. It is, again, it's PG-13. You're not going to get the violence and the sex that you get in Game of Thrones, but it's going to kind of scratch that itch in a way that I think a lot of people are going to be surprised to find, because this movie was panned critically as much as it was. All right, and at number 3, I've actually got one recommended by George R.R. Martin, who wrote A Song of Ice and Fire, which is what Game of Thrones is based on. And that is Dragonslayer. Now, this is a really cool movie from the 80s that is exactly what it sounds like. It is about a dragon slayer. And it's sort of a David and Goliath story. It's about kind of a small guy sent out to slay this dragon. And it's cool. You know, the effects are not going to be outstanding. You're going to be able to tell they're on a soundstage. But it's a dragon movie. There's not a ton of those. I looked. There are not a ton of decent, much less good dragon movies. And this is certainly like at the top of the list in terms of just a dragon movie. This one's really, really good. If you somehow have not seen Dragonslayer from 1981, I highly recommend it. And at number 2, not the best movie on the list, but by far the most like Game of Thrones for several reasons. You're going to think you're watching like the lost episode of Game of Thrones or some sort of flashback to Game of Thrones. It's got similar casting. Sean Bean is the lead. He's famous for being Ned Stark in season 1. This was shot around the same time. I don't know for sure, but this may have even been shot by a similar crew during the same time period, sort of as an offshoot to save money. I don't know. But it's got similar locations. And Carice Van Houten, who played the Red Witch in Game of Thrones, she stars in this as well in a not dissimilar role, I'll say that, but it actually revolves around the plague and its origins, and there's a supernatural factor and swords and armor and mud and caves, and you know, it's not the best one on the list, but it's solid, but it is the closest thing to Game of Thrones you're going to get without it actually being the real thing. And number 1 for me, I had to go with the best movie that I was able to put on this list that I think qualifies. And while it's not as similar to Game of Thrones as Black Death, the one I just mentioned, Braveheart is a solid choice if you just are going through Game of Thrones withdrawals. It's got a lot of similar elements. Obviously, it takes place in our real history, not in an alternate history. But that aside, it's going to feed the fire. It looks and feels like it takes place like in the North. So that sort of vibe is a lot of what you get from it. And most of you have seen this. This is one of those movies that very, very few people, when you ask them, have not seen it unless you're younger or just now old enough to maybe see it. It's great. I can't say too much more about it, but I wanted to include it, one, because it is the best one I could come up with, is just as far as its acclaim, not necessarily its similarity, but its acclaim. And I think it's similar enough to satisfy, again, to scratch that Game of Thrones itch. So please let me know what you thought of this list. If you think I'm just crazy for including some of these things and they belong nowhere near Game of Thrones, let me know in the comments. If you've got other recommendations, please let us know, because people will read these comments and these recommendations will help them as they're going through this very difficult time, and they're really their last year without Game of Thrones before it's finally over. So thanks for watching. Likes, comments, subscribes are always appreciated. And in fact, if you want to win that deck of cards I told you about, the deck with these cool designs on it, let's see if you can see somewhere, there's Jessica Rabbit. All the Jacks are a different version of Jack Nicholson, so that's kind of cool. You know, I'm excited about these. This is my deck, so I'm going to send the winner a brand new, there's the Warriors, I'm going to send the winner a brand new deck. Even the back's cool. It's got like guns and all kinds of stuff on it. So if you want to win that deck, just be a current subscriber and comment, and the top comment after 4 weeks, I'm going to reach out to you directly and get your address and ship you your own deck of cards. So thanks for watching, and you will see me next time.